Hey everyone, and welcome back to Miles on the Grid. This is episode 8, I believe. If not, it should be episode 8. In today's episode, we're joined by the amazing Maddi Scordia, MotoGP journalist, talent manager as well, Burns patron, and all-round business entrepreneur and, dare I say, creative founder, if that's the best way of introducing yourself, Maddi. But welcome to the show. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you for having me. I quite like that. That's a good intro. Thank you. I'm going to use that.
Is that going to be like the new sort of LinkedIn
I
button?
do love LinkedIn. It does make me look better than I am. It's great.
LinkedIn is amazing for that. It's one of my, dare I say, my Neanderthal passions, if I could use that. But thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me and my listeners. It's been a real pleasure to have you on. I guess the way that I like to always start every conversation is, where did your love of your sport, so where did your love of MotoGP and, dare I say, bike racing in general start from?
It's a bit of a funny story, that actually. I was dating this Italian boy when I was, 18, 19 years old, and he was just, I guess you could say, this stereotypical Italian who loved Valentino Rossi and just grew up on bikes, really.
Yeah.
And when we got together, I had absolutely no interest in it whatsoever. I thought the idea of riding a machine around in a circle was pretty dumb.
Fair enough.
But then I started watching it, and I realized that it kind of played to my competitive nature. I am very much someone who likes to win. I have a desperate need to win. When I fail, I only want to come back harder. And I think at the time I got into the sport, that is what kind of made me fall in love with it. And aside from that, growing up, I was always a very sporty young person, very competitive, always in some sort of racing. My family's a horse racing background, so that was it kind of played to that strength. And that's where it came from initially, and it blossomed from there. And I guess you could say I left the boy behind, but I took the sport with me. So.
But sometimes that's the best way to go, I guess. I think I'm not going to ask what bike he had. Was it 2-stroke, 4-stroke? Like what?
So he had, when we first got together, he had a Kimco 120cc scooter.
Okay.
So it was very sweet. And then he upgraded to a Kawasaki Versus. And I think he liked the road bike, touring bike, but it wasn't really a sport bike. So, I'm glad I get to see these amazing machines in a week in, week out. It makes me feel pretty proud.
I mean, when it comes to like machinery and stuff, I say we, I speak for myself. I can't speak for you about that, but I think I underestimate how much work goes into building a spec bike, for example. Like, you're looking at things which we think road bikes are cool, right? We think Yamaha R1s and whatnot are great, but what's it like seeing a fully spec'd factory MotoGP bike in the flesh? I've seen one, but what's that like for you?
You know what I find really interesting about it? It's like motorsport in general, maybe motorcycles to be specific, is always about 5 to 10 years behind in development in terms of automobiles. So if you look in other paddocks around the world, and even FMCGs, like what the consumer's buying on track, you think about Tesla is a great example of it, right? They're not the best machinery, but what they've done is put data first. And they'll build machinery around the data, which I think is awesome. And as much as I love the machinery I see week in, week out, I know it's a prototype. I know I'd never be able to buy that or ride it. Not that you would on the.
Can you imagine?
But it's just that it's so special. But I always think, like, wow, the data that goes into this industry as a whole, and that includes automobiles, is just huge. Like, and Tesla at the moment, as far as brands go, is my favorite. Like, they take what people want and they build around it. They build machines for people who will use it, not machines they think people will use. And I think we're starting to sort of see that creep into motorsport, particularly motorcycles now, and how we produce them, what makes them fast. Personally, I think MotoGP's gone wild with aerodynamics. Like, this is just,
I was about to,
why? We're going to have to start building more tracks and new tracks to accommodate this. And I think it's kind of got to the point now where the development has sped up so quickly that the infrastructure around it can't keep up. So it's kind of interesting to see that narrative unfold.
No, that's actually an interesting point, because I know that there's things like whole shot devices, for example, and which help to, like, if I'm correct, I'm thinking adjust for ride height, depending upon to use them. And you've got like different wings which have been tried out by different manufacturers and factory like Aprilia. Like, there's got to be, I don't say there's a crossover with F1 or let's say like in general GT racing, like car racing, but there's a time and a place. And I think at the moment, MotoGP is out accelerating its current development path to a point where it can't keep up with what it wants to ban or what it doesn't want to ban.
I think, you know what's happened? I think development has overtaken the love of it.
Okay.
So we're at a stage in this sport now, and I think everything that's sort of happened over the last 72 hours supports it.
Yeah.
We're at a stage where it's like, is development key, or is the love of the sport key? Is development of talent key, or is development of the bike key? You know, this isn't 2007 or 2006 where you could just pop some young kid on from Australia and watch him. It's not as that anymore. It's very much about how is this technology going to outbeat our competitors. If you look at the bikes on the grid, without a shadow of a doubt, the best bike is not the Ducati because they have 8 of them. It is Aprilia.
Yes. Yeah. Oh, controversial. I love it.
Absolutely controversial, right? Yeah. But every week you see a different Ducati winner. If it's not Pecco and Jack, it's you know, you've got Zarco on the podium. You've got, where did Marco Bezzecchi come from, like, you know, 3 months ago? Then you've got Luca Marini creeping in. So you've got all of these Ducatis, and that's great. But in saying that, you have a level of consistency with Aprilia that you don't have with the Ducati team. And that's what makes them a really great bike. And I would go even as far to say, despite the season that they've had, the Suzuki is also a great bike. It is one of the best on the grid. And I will say that with confidence. Despite everything that's happened, particularly the Joan Mir's DNFs and you know, that whole story in itself is just heartbreaking. It's one of the best developed bikes on the grid. They really do. And I think, you know, it speaks to what the Aprilia is and what the Ducati is. And is it the perfect mix of both? It's not far.
Yeah. It's funny you mentioned the Suzuki, because I think that Suzuki as a manufacturer, they were always a little bit underrated. Yes, they didn't always have, let's say, like the best power or even the best chassis at parts. And, you know, Joan Mir hasn't been shy about coming forward with his thoughts around that. But this year, for example, I think they've got their act together, albeit a few crashes between him and Alex Rins separately. And also, I think there was one race where they both crashed out. But the Aprilia, I personally, Aprilia are one of my favorite manufacturers. Like, my dad had a Aprilia scooter way back in the day. I was banned from riding bikes in my parents' household because of what happened with his. But I do think it's interesting you mentioned the consistency side. What do you think makes this might be a bit controversial for any bike fans. What do you think makes a great factory team versus what makes a great team in general? The reason I ask is because I'm looking at Grassini, I'm looking at, let's say, like factory Ducati, and I'm looking at Aprilia.
You know what I think in general, a lot of things make a great team. And anyone who's worked for a corporation will know what a good team needs to work. Okay. Yes. And we're not talking about just specifically this motorsport team. Anyone who's been in a team who considers themselves a pivotal part of that team knows what it takes to make a great team. So when I look at teams personally, I think consistency above all is what makes you great. So yes, you can be talented. You know, you can go out there and win and get as many top finishes as you want. But is your team constantly thinking about not even the next race, the next year, where are they going to put you? And I feel like the Aprilia story and the Aleix story and now the Maverick story really plays to that whole, we've done the shit rounds. Like Maverick has not had an easy run. Aleix went like, 20 years without well, not 20 years, I won't be dramatic, but he's gone a very long stint of his career without a great deal of success.
Yes, that's true.
And now we're seeing, you know, these two guys on this amazing Italian machine. And don't forget, Piaggio Group is huge. They're one of the biggest, motorcycle suppliers in the world. They're on this fantastic machine with a team around them, with people with great experience like Massimo Rivola, who has that F1 experience. The whole team, from the hospitality right through to the mechanics, have worked in other series and other competitions. And they've come together and gone, I know what it takes to be a winner. And we'll start with consistency is key. You know, I think Massimo and the entire team have a little bit of higher monkeys pay peanuts, hire monkeys, that kind of
Yeah.
man. So they know in their team that they have an expectation for everyone to be their best, because whether it's this race or the next one or the last race of the year, they will win.
Mm.
And if it's not this year, it will be next year. That will come, because their closest competition on track is Yamaha, and only one of the 4 riders is consistent. That's a problem. That is a real problem. If only one, quarter of your entire team is consistent on track, what's wrong? This year we've seen Maverick become consistent. We've seen Aleix be consistent.
Yeah.
That speaks a lot to the team, and that's what differentiates them to everyone else. I really see that on a regular basis. I think Ducati is a great team, but I think Ducati have kind of gone with the idea of saturation is key. But do they want to win a constructors championship, or do they want to win a world championship?
That's the question, right? Because you've got, let's say, I'm not going to take Austria for example, but if I personally was the Ducati team principal, I'm not, and as much as it pains me to say this because Jack Miller's my favorite rider, I'm not letting Jack fight Pecco. No way. No way. Take the constructors' points. That's just my personal feeling.
What I find really interesting about Ducati, and this, when I said it speaks to my competitive nature, this is it.
Yeah.
The first person you have to learn to beat is your teammate.
Ooh, true. Yeah.
Controversial, harsh, call it what you want. Jack's been around the block for more than 7 years now. He's on potentially one of the best bikes on the grid. We know how strong the Ducati is. We know what it's capable of achieving. We've seen it for decades, right? But they haven't had a champion 4 decades on a Ducati.
Ooh.
Jack should have learned. I don't have to be best buds to beat him. Yes, you could be mates off the track. That's great. I love that. Yeah. And I think it's wonderful. I think it's wonderful that Jack feels the need to jump to Pecco's defense when he's asked a question to Pecco, seemingly because he feels like he should. I think that's lovely. And taking on some kind of cause of responsibility for Pecco's actions. I think that's beautiful. But you have to learn to beat your teammate. If you want to be world champion, if you want to be the best, Jack hasn't had that many wins. Why?
I mean, I'm putting my bias aside. I agree.
And you look into the Aprilia garage, okay? Maverick and Aleix do not talk to each other the entire weekend.
No.
If you watch the footage about the little documentary that Dorna did on Aleix, you'll see Aleix is abusing Pole. That's his brother. He's saying, what an idiot, while he's on track. So he has that ability to completely separate his friendships from his ability to win. And I think that's incredibly important, because when you're an athlete, your entire goal is to come first. You need to learn how to win, and you need to be good at it. Are some people still learning that? I think so.
It's the brutal reality of sport, right? I think we underestimate what it takes to get to the top, but I think sometimes we also overestimate what's needed to stay there.
Exactly.
Like, you need to do the bare minimum. I'm not going to get into the contract situation, which we saw, because I saw Wayne's comments this morning, but which in itself speaks for itself. And my thoughts are with Remy. But when you think about what it actually means to be a MotoGP rider, what it means to be at the pinnacle of the sport, like you said, you have to beat your teammate. You can't just rock up and be like, yeah, it's cool, great, thanks. I've enjoyed the ride. No pun intended. You have to be that person. Look at what Mark did. Mark decided, you know what, as much as I like people, this is my team. I am going to dominate the Repsol Honda. They're going to mold it in, I don't want to say my image, but literally around my physique. It's going to be hard as hell to ride. No one else can do it to the same degree of success. And you're going to have to suck it up if you want to ride correctly.
And to an extent, that was the same Rossi story. We all hear stories about how Rossi came to Yamaha. It was late at night. He came in a hood. He said the bike was crap and you should develop it like this if you really want me. Like, we've heard those stories.
Yeah.
It was the same case. But you know what the difference is? Those two men knew. Like, just, they have this innate ability to win. They knew it. They knew it. And they weren't about to let anyone tell them they couldn't. And I think we're actually kind of seeing that resurgence now with people like Maverick and people like Aleix. They're like, you know what? I can win. why not? Why? And Jorge Martin is like,
Yes.
oh, I was so devastated for him
Well,
yesterday. I really was. I was, because he's a real cocky man. Like, you should see him when he comes in for interviews. He's like, whenever you think of a salesperson 101,
yeah.
like Wolf of Wall Street kind of
Oh
guy,
yeah, yeah.
so like just well presented, says what he means, doesn't mince his words, and knows what he's talking about. He's just off that little bit of the win, you know. He'll get there.
Yeah.
He will, but it's just in time. And I think we're starting to see that with that kind of mid pack of MotoGP going. It's not that competitive. There's probably an opportunity for me to do something here, and that's why we're seeing it happen in, satellite teams as well. And I think that's wonderful. I'm very excited for it.
I think it's interesting you mentioned that, because I also think if we look around the grid, there's one person who we've sort of not missed out on, but Fabio. Fabio, because he smiles, and because he's that sort of, hey, aka sort of like the Daniel Ricciardo type of MotoGP. Everyone's not taking him seriously. The dude won last year. He's been a serial winner. He has developed the team around him to the point where Franco can't get a look in terms of bike development and whatnot. What does that say to how the future of MotoGP looks? Because we've got, like you mentioned, Lucas Marini, Bocchini, Bastianini, Jorge Martin, Bears, like top tier riders who are, dare I say, on the cusp of being elite. And you got Pecco. Pecco's still young. You got like, where does the sport go from here?
I think what I find most concerning about the sport in general is that, how do I put this in a way that it makes sense? You can't expect an athlete to know the law when all they've done their whole life is ride bikes. So if you ask an athlete for legal advice, they're not going to be able to give it for you.
True.
Freddie Spencer.
Yeah.
Freddie Spencer.
Yeah.
But Freddie Spencer by nature is not a solicitor. He's not someone who can apply law, and we see that in his work.
Yes.
And I think what worries me about the sport at the moment is Dorna is not an events company. Dorna bought the sport because Carmelo Espeleta was a failed racer in the 60s. And they bought it because it was passionate. They loved it.
Yeah.
But they're not by nature an events company. They think of themselves as the home of motorcycle racing, which is great, but you're not giving people much for their money at the minute.
True.
And we're now introducing new parts of this sport which have not been well thought out. And I think I spoke about this a couple of days ago. Nobody realistically on the surface has a problem with doing more racing, except maybe the athletes do, and that's a whole deep kettle of fish in itself, right?
Yeah.
But on the surface, we love racing. We want to see more where we can. Of course we do. But with that, we probably want to see the current racing have its application done correctly.
It's a good point.
If a racing incident happens, we want the right rule applied to the racing incident. And I think Taka Nakagami versus what happened to Fabio at Assen is a really good example of going, what?
Yeah,
I think the consumers lost a whole lot of trust in the business as a whole, because they can't trust the business to make the right decision based on the rule book that's already there. And that's a real problem. And Dorna seemed to be under this impression that by adding more races on a Saturday, although it creates more content, and yes, it may sell more tickets for the first or the second day of the weekend.
Yeah.
Is that ultimately going to make the championship better? Or is it just enough for you to fill in more content to have something to talk about now that people like Mark and Rossi aren't there? Is that what it's about? Because even on the weekend, if you were watching, they spent more time focusing on Mark in a team shirt in pit lane than they did on, I don't know, Digia or Anea. And it's like, he's not racing. Focus on the action.
But this is the thing, right? I think and this applies across to like F1 as well as superbikes. We get to the point where we think, okay, cool. There's like one superstar or two superstars that we want to focus on. Excuse my French, but ban everyone else. Like we're forgetting everyone else. The racing centered around them. In F1, it's Lewis and Max, and MotoGP at the moment it's Pecco and Fabio. and an air to a degree. But then when you go deeper in MotoGP, it literally revolves around Mark. That's not an issue, but it's something which could be addressed in a slightly different manner. World Superbikes is rare and top right, with a bit of Scott Redding. But I guess the issue that I have around the sprint races, and I think the segues into that point we were going to talk about, is you're trying to copy the World Superbike model, right? Because they've got their own sprint pole race. You've got 3 races a weekend, and yes, diehards will tune in. I tune into at least 2 of them just because it's fun to watch, right? And you want to have something to watch on a Sunday, and there's different elements to each race, I guess, like in terms of strategy. But is that going to bring someone like my dad, who might turn on BT Sport or might turn on Eurosport, depending on where it's on, and be like, yep, okay, cool, fantastic? Or is he just going to continue to be a casual and watch it when literally nothing else is on? Is he going to be as invested in the riders? Is he going to think about, okay, cool, Dorna are doing this in the same way that he thinks about Liberty Media Group? It's not more events that we need. And I'm not for or against sprint races. I have a bit of a neutral view at the moment, because I was against it in F1, and then it turned out to be a mild success. So I'm a little bit biased at the moment. But I don't think it's going to bring in the viewership in terms of whether it's real life viewership or whether it's online viewership that Dorna are craving.
I've got it. So let's go back a few steps. Let's go back to sort of the 2020 season.
Yeah.
I think the reason why people are so skeptical of this being a success in any way whatsoever is, first of all, you had a great opportunity to tell a story in 2020 with MotoGP Unlimited.
Yes.
You had an opportunity to create this wonderful new generation of, and the good and the bad. You could have told the story of why Petrucci had to leave MotoGP.
Oh,
why?
Yeah.
You could have told the story of how Johann Zarco was like suddenly this Pramac Ducati doing really well. There was no focus on him. You could have told the story in more depth about Joan Mir. Joan Mir was a 2020 world champion in his own right.
Everyone forgets.
And what was potentially the hardest year to compete ever, both emotionally and physically. And, everybody gives him crap because he won one race. He won one of the hardest races he could have possibly won in one of the hardest years there ever was, and potentially ever will be in life.
Yeah.
So, you butchered that by also putting you put 2 people from a company as producers who have never done any form of production in their life, which makes no sense. So you butchered that. And then, simple things like, we sign these passes. Every time I get one, I have to sign a document that says if I get hit by a motorcycle in the paddock, I won't sue them.
Okay.
But if I ask for a document or a policy on sexual assault or harassment in the paddock, well, that doesn't exist. So
that's grim. Yeah.
That's grim. So not only do you not have a policy to fit and make sure that all the people you issue passes to are secure and safe in your environment, you're not telling the story. The people who work in your paddock don't really have anywhere to turn to if something should occur, which it does. Let's pretend it doesn't. Let's not pretend it doesn't. It happens in every corporation in the world. Why? Yeah. And then lastly, you did a fan survey all of 2.5 months ago that you asked us these questions.
Yeah.
And then you have the audacity to come to us in a press conference and tell us, oh, well, we're doing this with or without you. So we made the decision before the survey went out, and the survey supported it, and that was great. But we don't believe you because we haven't seen the results from the survey. And then once again, Carmelo Espeleta, a millionaire, points his finger to the media and says, ask your editor to pay you more money to come to more races. And it's like, read the room. Dude, read the room. Do you know what's going on in the world? That's the issue. People don't have faith. People don't trust a company that doesn't seem trustworthy. How are Dorna going to fix that? That's what has to be fixed, because then you can sell. Then people believe. Then people want to come racing. That's the issue.
I think the disconnect between not only fans and Dorna at large, but also, let's say, like journalists like yourself and people who are working in the paddock, it does have a big effect, because eventually the riders are going to think, okay, cool, what am I competing for? Where's the prestige in what being a MotoGP champion is? Of course, you're always going to have the accolade, but at the end of the day, we want to shout about it. You know, I logged on to watch MotoGP Unlimited about 2 months ago and didn't get past episode 1, which is hell. But I know time's against us, so I'm not gonna touch on that. But in terms of sort of wider questions, I had a question come in actually. So in terms of your favorite ride this year, and maybe we could be a little bit quick on this one because I've got another couple of questions to ask. In terms of your favorite ride, what's been the sort of standout moment for you this year?
Ooh, I don't know. That's really hard. Oh, look, you know what? I can make it really easy, and I think it just speaks to his talent. We saw how many Ducatis were against Fabio yesterday at what primarily a Ducati track, and this little, like, he's just such a golden boy, just makes his way to the front. And I really thought that was beautiful. There's been some wonderful, spectacular moments this year, but I think that can't be forgotten, just how spectacular that ride was. And you know, it's all cat and dog fights for points now, so I think that was pretty phenomenal.
No, I can appreciate that, and if anyone hasn't watched it, please do, because to almost close within, I think it was under 5/10 on the last lap. I don't know if Bagnaia was backing off or what, but at the end of it,
time, he made a mistake. He was losing time.
You know, like Fabio kept the pressure on. It was literally like watching, was it Kota last year? I'm trying to remember. Oh, it will come back to me. I think for myself, it was probably Darren Binder getting his first points.
Yeah.
Or Miguel Oliveira winning in Thailand.
I thought that was pretty spectacular too.
Yeah,
and
in the wet.
Darren, I love him. Jesus. And Remy. Anyway.
Yeah, I might try and get Remy on the show to talk all things Moto 2, but we'll see. I'll reach out to his management. He seems like it. And in terms of from like an overall perspective, I know that you do some work with being a patron for the Burns Society outside. Do you want to talk a little bit about that as well? And then we can talk about talent management and what that means to you.
So I was in a fire in November of 2020, and I burnt 60% of my body. And I spent 3 months in hospital, and I had 60+ surgeries and skin grafts galore. So I look a little bit like a patchwork now. But you know, between learning to walk and emotionally overcoming all of these new obstacles I never thought I would have before, and accepting how my body had changed, I kind of got involved in some hospital initiatives in Australia. And not only did it help me meet people like me, but it also helped me help people. Because I think anyone, and the motorsport community was really kind to me at that time, because I think we've all kind of felt something at some time that's affected us deeply. And it made me feel really comfortable and safe to be able to tell people, honestly, you are always going to have scars. You are always going to be emotional about this in some way. However, how you choose to use that and how you choose to navigate your life past that, there are two ways. One's very dark and one's very positive. And once you start to sort of accept that there are things you can't change in life and you just have to kind of get on with it in the kindest possible way.
Yes, of course.
You do. And I think that's what makes me really happy about my involvement with those organizations, because I have the opportunity to help people who feel lost like I did. And I think sometimes it takes meeting someone like you to get to that point.
I can say I can appreciate that, and I think it's a testament to resilience as well, right? Because it's easy for people to, and I'm thinking in a broader sense now, it's easy for people to, let's say, like give up on things, or to say, you know what, life's tough. But when you've literally like gone through an experience like you did, and then have the opportunity to not only share that experience, which I'm very grateful for, but to also say, you know what, I want to then go and help other people change their lives. I think that's fantastic. What's the name of the patronage that you're working with, by the way?
I work with the Royal North Shore Hospital of Sydney, and I also
Okay,
work with the Royal Victoria Hospital in Belfast.
nice,
And when I was living in Australia, I was working with the Burns Foundation as well. So
nice.
lots of different sort of areas, but it's been really great for me to be able to connect with, I think, young people, old people, children, because we're all at different
Mm,
stages in life. So
yeah.
navigating that is helpful and hard and all of those kind of things.
Well, listeners, please do go check out those patronages, because it's serious work that they're doing. And I think at the end of the day, you know, whilst you may not have been affected in this particular way, there's a lot of things that we can do as a society to give back. And I think that's very important. But Maddi, quick question for you, just around wider talent management. So I noticed, if you don't mind me talking about this, I noticed you started a talent management agency. Do you
Yeah,
mind telling me a bit more, me and my listeners, a bit more about that?
yeah. I think for me, I kind of felt like I was the only Australian in the UK
Sure.
in the last 5 years in motorsport, which I know I'm not. I
Yeah.
specifically know I'm not, but I talk to a lot of talent, and I've worked in Australian superbikes for a long time, and I see kids that just struggle. Like, it is
Mm,
hard because motorsport's not the big cake in Australia.
yeah.
So when I moved over here, I had my sort of baby brother come with me, and he's not my brother, but he basically is.
Yeah.
His name's Patch, and he's racing for Leon Haslam's team, Affinity,
Oh yeah.
in GP.
Nice.
So I've been working with him for quite a while now, just working on sponsorship and how to present yourself on your social media, how to talk to
Mm,
sponsors, how to really execute, because you only have so much space in your leathers in this modern age. How do you get money that
yeah.
isn't just in here? So I've really been helping him develop that skill set, which is what I've done for work my whole life.
Yeah.
So I started an agency, and suddenly I had a whole bunch of kids go, "Can you help me?" And I was like, yes, because if I'm making you money, I know it's my reputation at stake. So I
Yeah.
have to help you make money to make myself money. And I think it's been quite exciting that this has actually happened. And I know that Jacob's coming back for a second season next year because he's got wonderful sponsors and he works so well with them. And we've
Yeah.
helped him develop that skill set. And now we have the opportunity to do that for other young Australians and Kiwis as well, which I think is
Nice.
just
Nice.
like, that's what I want to see. I want to see more of us here.
Yeah. No, I agree. And I think looking at BSB, that's a whole other kettle of fish. But in terms of how you approach sponsorships, I know it's a massive ask. I think it's upwards of, let's say, like 200K just to fund a race bike, not
Yeah.
even to fund a race seat. So I think that work that you're doing is quite impressive. And if anyone does want to get into talent management, I'm not going to say that you have positions available for them, but please do reach out to Maddi, because I do think that you've got a wealth of experience that you can not only share with, and my arms disappeared off the stream. I think you've got a wealth of experience that you could not only share with them, but to also guide people in the right direction, right? It's not easy starting the business, but I think you've, for some, dare I say, your entrepreneurial flares allowed you to start multiple ones, which is pretty cool. Maddi, just last point for myself, as we wrap up, where, with my listeners, where can they find you if they want to either get in contact with you or want to know more?
At Maddi Scordia, everywhere. At Maddi Scordia. You'll find me anywhere. It's at Maddi Scordia. Any questions, please feel free. Always up for a chat.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Maddi. It's been a real pleasure to have you on the show. And I'm sure that we'll keep in contact as the season continues to progress.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Miles.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye.